A bird of prey wears the feathers of a dove. Commander Eva Rostova stood on the command deck of the human vessel Accountability. Before her, the void was split by the serene blue marble of the planet Oakhaven. It was a world new to the galactic stage, its people gentle and brilliantly artistic. Beside it hung the Predator, the Kythian hegemony dreadnought, Gilded Hand, a vessel of polished gold and military-grade emitters. The Kythians had arrived weeks ago offering protection and technology. They had received in return a contract of gratitude. Now that gratitude was being collected, and the process looked like a strip mining operation with better legal footing. The stakes were the soul of a civilization, and humanity was here to witness its foreclosure. Rostova's mandate was to observe, but every line in the human charter screamed for something more. She knew this would end in a forum beyond mere observation, a public inquiry that would force the truth into the light. Rostova turned her voice low and even. "Magister, show me the tithe manifests from the last rotation." The air shimmered as the fleet mind's holographic avatar materialized a form of pure, interwoven light. Data scrolled across the main screen columns of figures that represented planetary infrastructure, refined metals, and something more chilling, personnel manifests. The Kythian doctrine of gratitude tithes was an insidious piece of legal architecture. It was a debt that could never be fully paid. The helpers were consuming the helped. A predator's logic wrapped in a savior's robes. Humanity had seen this before, and it had sworn to never let it stand. Her first officer, Jian Li, stepped beside her, his arms crossed. "They're loading the atmospheric processors from the northern continent. The Oakhaven government signed off on it an hour ago." He didn't need to state the obvious that continent would now struggle to support its population through the coming season. "It's their world, Ava," he said, the words tasting like ash. Their leaders agreed to the terms. Rostova's eyes remained fixed on the golden ship. "Every contract has a breaking point, Jian. We just need to find the right hammer. The universe does not care for intent. It only measures effect." She tapped her console, bringing up a file flagged with the highest diplomatic urgency. It was time to draft a message to the Gilded Hand, a message that would begin the slow, deliberate process of counting the cost. The air in the small dwelling on Oakhaven was thick with the scent of ozone and dust. Alara watched from her window as a golden beam, precise and utterly indifferent, cored the district's primary water resequencer from its foundation. The massive cylinder, the work of 3 generations of her family, lifted silently into the sky toward the waiting maw of a Kythian cargo shuttle. Her youngest son Tari tugged on her sleeve. They said it was a gift. He whispered, his voice trembling. "A thank you gift for keeping the bad ships away." Alara pulled him close, her own heart a cold stone in her chest. "It is my love," she murmured, stroking his hair. "It is a gift of our gratitude." A debt of gratitude is the heaviest burden of all. Prelate Orlan of the Kythian hegemony reviewed the human message with a flicker of amusement. It was a work of careful, almost painfully polite legalism. The humans, flying their starkly functional ship named Accountability, extended greetings and affirmed their rights under the Allied Worlds Commerce Accords. They requested permission to send observers to witness the joyful exchange between the hegemony and their new Oakhaven partners. The prelate's avian features tightened in what passed for a smile. The humans were predictable. They were a young species obsessed with fairness, their morality as unsubtle as their ship design. He would grant their request. Let them watch. Let them see how true civilization worked, how the strong benevolently guided the weak. The arrogant mind believes every mirror shows a friend. He dictated his reply, layering it with phrases of welcome and mutual respect. He spoke of the great symphony of interstellar cooperation and the honor of sharing their wisdom. He would allow the humans to see the contracts, to speak with the Oakhaven leaders, to witness every transaction. Each step would be another nail in the coffin of their naive outrage. The documents were flawless, the consent absolute. The Oakhaven people were showering their protectors with gifts, a beautiful and necessary expression of their subordinate place in the cosmos. He sent the message, a master extending a hand to a child. The child he was sure would soon learn its place. On the accountability, the Kithian reply was dissected word by word. Ensign Barris Thorne, the ship's legal officer, projected the text in the briefing room. "It's exactly what we expected," Thorne said, his youth betrayed by the intensity in his eyes. "Condescending, welcoming, and it gives us everything we asked for." Rostova nodded, circling a phrase in the air with her finger. "A transparent display of mutual uplift. We'll hold them to that." Her gaze shifted to the AI. "Magister, you have the full contract text?" "Yes, the one the Oakhaven government signed." The AI's light form pulsed. "I do, Commander. On the surface, it is a masterpiece of reciprocal agreement. They provide security. Oakhaven provides material compensation. The clauses are indexed, the terms defined. A system built on lies must polish its truths to a blinding sheen." "Look deeper," Rostova commanded. "Cross-reference the signature dates with Kithian fleet movements and local resource shortages. Contracts are signed by people. People can be pressured." Lee leaned forward. "You're looking for coercion." "I'm looking for the space between the words," Rostova corrected. "The Kithians are architects of empire, but they build with paper instead of warships. That means their true weapons are fear and exhaustion." The AI's avatar flickered, processing terabytes of data. Sensor logs, shipping manifests, diplomatic chatter. Even Oakhaven's own internal network archives captured before the Kithians had locked them down. A web of causality began to form, invisible but undeniable. A fuel shortage near a key agricultural hub, followed by a Kithian offer of aid. A pirate raid on a mining colony which Kithian patrols were strangely slow to respond to. Then another generous offer. Each time a new annex was signed, a new tithe levied. "They aren't conquering Oakhaven," Thorne murmured, seeing the pattern emerge. "They're making the planet conquer itself." Rostova's expression was grim. "They make survival so costly that servitude looks like a bargain." It was a quiet, insidious form of warfare, one that left no craters or corpses and only a civilization, slowly bleeding out, thanking the leech for its service. An empty stomach will sign any promise. The first step was complete. The Kithians had opened the door. The next step was to walk through it and start turning over the rocks. Rostova looked at her team. "Barris, I want every precedent you can find on economic coercion and inequitable contracts under Allied Worlds law. Gian, prepare a security team. We're going to accept the prelate's invitation." The shuttle ride to the Gilded Hand was silent and tense. The Kithian vessel loomed a monument to wealth and power. Its golden hull was so polished it reflected the stars, a perfect mirror that showed nothing of what was inside. Rostova Thorne and two security officers were met by a Kithian honor guard. Their movements were fluid, their armor ornate. They carried no visible weapons, but their presence was a weapon in itself. They were led through corridors of shimmering alloy and holographic art, depicting great Kithian triumphs, suns being tamed, worlds being terraformed, lesser species bowing in gratitude. It was a calculated display of dominance. Power does not need to shout when it can build cathedrals to itself. Prelate Orlan greeted them in an observation chamber with a panoramic view of Oakhaven. He was taller than the guards draped in white and gold robes. His voice was a melodious baritone perfectly modulated for condescension. "Commander Rostova," he purred, extending a three-fingered hand in a gesture of welcome. "It is an honor to host you, to share in this moment of joyous partnership." Rostova met the gesture, but did not take the hand. "Prelate, we appreciate your transparency." Her gaze drifted to the planet below, where another orbital lifter was ascending from the surface. "You are very busy." The prelate's smile widened. "The generosity of our friends is overwhelming. They insist on showering us with tokens of their esteem. It is the Kithian way to accept gratitude with grace." Thorn stepped forward, his datapad held ready. "Prelate Orlan, as per our agreement, we would like to review the full tithe ledgers and speak with the Oakhaven signatories." Orlan gestured magnanimously to a nearby console. "Of course. We have nothing to hide. Our partnership is a model of ethical expansion, a testament to what can be achieved when the wise guide the willing." He watched them, his dark eyes glittering with confidence. He believed his own narrative. Or perhaps he simply believed that no one had the power to question it. A cage of gold is still a cage. Rostova knew that this meeting was not about finding a loophole. It was about gathering the evidence needed to build a case not in a closed courtroom, but in the court of galactic opinion. As Thorn began interfacing with the Kithian data core, downloading the public versions of the contracts, Rostova engaged the prelate. "Your people have a long history of this benevolent guidance," she stated, her tone neutral. "We have studied your expansion. It is remarkably efficient." Orlan preened. "Efficiency is a form of kindness, Commander. We prevent the chaos and wastefulness so common in younger races. We provide stability. In return, we ask only for what is freely offered." Rostova held his gaze. "And if the offering stops," the prelate's smile did not waver, but a coldness entered his eyes. "True gratitude is not a fleeting emotion. It is a state of being. Our partners understand this. They are happy to contribute to the greater good." The threat was unspoken but perfectly clear. The stability could be removed. The chaos could be allowed to return. You cannot threaten a man with a storm when he has already lost everything to the rain. On Oakhaven, a master artisan named Lena packed her tools. They were simple things, chisels, hammers, focusing crystals, but in her hands they had shaped the crystalline architecture for which her city was famous. Now her name was on a list. She was part of a gratitude offering, a tithe of skilled labor. She and 1,000 others were to be transported to a Kithian forge world to share their gifts for an unspecified duration. Her workshop was being dismantled by sterile Kithian drones. She was not a prisoner, they had told her. She was an honored guest. As she packed, she looked at the unfinished sculpture in the center of the room, a monument to her world's first star flight. A future that now felt like a forgotten dream. The data streamed back to the accountability. Magister absorbed it instantly, its analytical power far exceeding anything the Kithians could have anticipated. While Thorn had been downloading the public ledgers, the AI had been tracing the data packets to their source, mapping the Kithian network architecture, and noting the faint encrypted shadows of ledgers that were not public. There were 2 sets of books. There were always 2 sets of books. The truth is not in the words spoken, but in the words carefully omitted. Rostova's command team gathered around the holographic display as Magister rendered its findings. The public ledger showed a balanced exchange. The private one showed a parasitic drain, an exponential curve of resource extraction that would render Oakhaven uninhabitable within 50 standard years. There it is, we said, his voice tight. It's a slow legal execution. Thorn traced a line of code with his finger. The contracts are still the issue. The Oakhaven leaders signed them. We can prove the outcome is genocidal, but the Kithians will argue the signatories were acting with free will. Then we need to redefine free will, Rostova said. Her mind was already moving to the next step. Simple exposure was not enough. The Kithians would dismiss it as human propaganda, a slander motivated by jealousy. They needed to force the issue into a binding forum. They needed to make the Kithians defend their system out loud. A parasite detests the light. Magister Rostova began, her voice taking on a new hardness. Begin a deeper analysis. I want to know about the collar doctrine. A hush fell over the briefing room. The collar doctrine was a half-mythical, deeply classified aspect of Kithian law. It was rumored to be the philosophical foundation for their entire empire, a legal framework for permanent subjugation. Finding details was nearly impossible. Most species who encountered it were no longer in a position to report on it. Magister's avatar pulsed with intense light. Commander, that is a high-risk search. Probing for those keywords will almost certainly be detected. I'm counting on it, Rostova replied. Let them know we're looking. Let them know we're learning their language. The Kithians reacted faster than expected. Within the hour, a new tithe was announced. It was an escalation, a clear message to the watching humans. The hegemony was demanding control of Oakhaven's educational system and its historical archives. They were claiming the right to curate the planet's culture, to protect it from destabilizing influences. The Oakhaven government, fractured and demoralized, signed the new annex. It was a cultural lobotomy performed with a pen. When you cannot break a people's body, you break their memory. Lee slammed his fist on the console. This is it. They're erasing them. Rostova remained calm, but a cold fire burned in her eyes. This was the move she had been waiting for. It was a strategic error on Orlan's part, born of arrogance. Seizing property was one thing. Seizing a people's history was a line that resonated with every member of the Allied worlds. Baris, she said, her voice sharp. Find me a precedent. Not on commerce, but on cultural sovereignty. Find me the case law we can use to demand a formal inquiry. Thorn's fingers flew across his console. I might have something, Commander. An old trade dispute involving the Archon Compact. They used a navigational safety clause to force a public hearing on resource diversion. It's obscure, but it's solid. That's our way, and Rostova declared. We will not accuse them of theft or slavery. We will accuse them of being a hazard, a systemic danger to the stability of this sector. She turned to the AI. Magister, draft the petition. Cite the Kithian resource, drain the mass population movements, and the seizure of infrastructure as factors creating unpredictable energy fluctuations and traffic patterns in the Oakhaven system. Frame it as a matter of public safety. Copy the petition to the sector's Allied Worlds beacon. Make it public. A law is a lever, and you must find the right place to stand. The AI's light glowed brightly. The plan was logical. It was efficient. It used the opponent's own bureaucratic weight against them. The message was sent, a single, precisely aimed legal torpedo. Prelate Orlan received the human petition, and for the first time his composure cracked. It was not an accusation of immorality. It was an accusation of incompetence. The humans were not calling him a monster. They were calling him a bad administrator. It was a profound, calculated insult to the Kithian ideal of perfect order. To ignore it would be an admission of guilt, a stain on his honor and the hegemony's reputation. To accept it meant facing the humans in a public forum, a place where their irritating obsession with numbers and facts would be on full display. His arrogance made the choice for him. He would accept the inquiry. He would crush them with the sheer weight of his civilization's superiority. He would make an example of this Commander Rostova and her ship of accountants. The proudest neck is the easiest to break. The agreement came back. The public inquiry was set. It would be held on the Gilded Hand in 3 rotations. Orlan was choosing the ground, confident in his advantage. Rostova read the confirmation, a thin smile on her lips. He took the bait. She looked at her team, the architects of this moment. He thinks this is a stage for him to perform on. We're going to turn it into a courtroom. The preparations began in earnest. This would not be a battle of ships, but of ideas. The weapons would be disclosures, precedents, and the cold, hard math of exploitation. Lee organized security protocols, Thorne refined his legal arguments, and Rostova consulted with Magister, planning their primary exhibit. "The mirror ledger is ready, Commander," the AI reported. Its avatar displayed a swirling matrix of data. It is a real-time accounting of the Oakhaven exchange. It tracks not only what the Kithians have taken, but also what Oakhaven has lost, the opportunity, cost, the projected future deficits, the social trust decay. It is a complete balance sheet of their gratitude. This was the human fleet's unique contribution to galactic jurisprudence. Some civilizations fought with disruptors, others with economic might. This fleet, born from the ashes of a darker age in human history, had chosen a different path. This fleet teaches by numbers and remembers by ledgers, never by collars. Rostova studied the mirror ledger. It was beautiful in its brutal honesty. It did not editorialize. It simply counted. "It will be our only witness," she said softly. "And it will be the only one we need." As the day of the inquiry approached, the mood on the accountability was one of focused determination. They were a small ship, a single data point in a vast galaxy. But they were about to prove that a single well-placed truth could fracture an empire. A mountain is but a collection of stones. A truth is a collection of facts. A junior technician on Oakhaven watched the human ship in orbit. Her name was Kaylin, and she was part of a team that had been monitoring interstellar transmissions on a hidden low-power array. They had seen the human petition go out. They had seen the Kithian acceptance. For the first time in weeks, a flicker of something dangerous had returned to her and her small group hope. They did not know what the humans planned, but they knew that silence had been broken. The void was no longer empty. Someone was watching. Someone was counting. The day of the inquiry arrived. The human shuttle, a stark gray dart against the golden expanse of the Gilded Hand, docked with practiced precision. Rostova walked out first, followed by Thorne and her honor guard. The air in the Kithian flagship was cool and sterile, smelling faintly of ionized metals and an alien incense designed to convey tranquility. The corridor to the inquiry chamber was lined with Kithian guards, their faces impassive, their presence a silent, continuous reminder of who held the power here. They walked the corridor of law, a path designed to intimidate and overawe. But Rostova's gaze was fixed forward. She was not here to be impressed. She was here to present a bill. Truth does not need an honor guard. The inquiry chamber was vast, a circular room with a high vaulted ceiling. In the center was a raised platform for the speakers. Around it, in tiered rings, were the witnesses. A quorum had been assembled, the captains of several neutral freighter crews who had been in the system, Allied Worlds observers patched in via a secure tight beam, and in a designated section, the delegation of Oakhaven leaders. Their faces were gray, their posture defeated. They looked like prisoners at their own trial. Prelate Orlan stood on the platform, resplendent in his ceremonial robes. He greeted the assembly with a voice full of warmth and confidence. He was the master of this room, and he knew it. He began his opening statement, a symphony of self-praise. He spoke of Kithian history, of their sacred duty to uplift the younger races. He painted a picture of Oakhaven as a lost child now safely in the arms of a loving guardian. "We have brought them stability," Orlan declared, his voice resonating through the chamber. "We have brought them purpose. And in their boundless joy, they have shared their world with us. This is not a transaction. It is a communion, a symphony of gratitude." He gestured to the broken Oakhaven delegates, who dutifully bowed their heads. "Many a shepherd shears his flock to the skin." He concluded his performance and turned to Rostova, a look of patronizing pity on his face. "And now we will hear from the commander of the accountability, she who has come so far to question a gift. Please, Commander, enlighten us with your concerns." The room was silent. All eyes were on her. The weight of a world's future rested on this moment. Rostova walked to the center of the platform. She looked at Orlan, at the observers, and at the Oakhaven leaders. Her voice when she spoke was not loud, but it was clear and cold, and it cut through the perfumed air of the chamber like a shard of glass. "We thank the prelate for his words." She began, her tone perfectly even. "The human vessel. Accountability has been observing this symphony of gratitude with great interest." She paused, letting the silence hang for a beat. "And with the court's permission, we would like to present our transcription of the notes." She gave a small, sharp nod to Thorn, who stood at a terminal at the edge of the platform. He pressed a single icon on his datapad. A blade of grass can split a rock if it grows in the right place. Holographic displays, far larger and sharper than the Kithian models, materialized around the chamber. They did not show images of warships or angry speeches. They showed numbers, columns and streams of raw, undeniable data. Resource outflows from Oakhaven measured to the microgram. Energy consumption from the Kithian fleet cross-referenced with Oakhaven's planetary grid deficits. Population displacement charts linked to the manifests of labor tithes. It was the sterile, irrefutable language of mathematics. Prelate Orlan's condescending smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion. He had expected a moral lecture, a passionate but toothless appeal to fairness. He had not expected an audit. The Oakhaven delegates, who had been staring at the floor, slowly lifted their heads. Their eyes widened as they saw their planet's slow death, quantified its pain rendered in the universal language of numbers. The neutral captains leaned forward, their professional interest piqued. The allied world's observers began taking furious notes. At the top of the central display, a single stark figure blinked into existence, the total calculated value of Oakhaven's gratitude in the last rotation. Beside it, another number began to count up with terrifying speed. It was the interest compounded every second on a debt that was never meant to be repaid. The first note of a different symphony had just been played. It was the sound of a receipt being printed. "This is an interesting fiction," Commander Prelate Orlan said, his voice dripping with theatrical calm. He gestured at the swirling numbers. "A creative interpretation of our mutual prosperity. But it is just that, a fiction. Human data compiled for human purposes to create a human narrative of grievance." He turned his gaze to the observers. "They are a young race. They mistake the complexities of galactic commerce for malice. It is a predictable, if tiresome, stage of development." He was attempting to regain control, to frame the evidence as an emotional outburst. "A king does not argue with the peasant who curses the rain." Rostova did not take the bait. She did not defend her data's integrity. She simply gave another quiet nod to Thorn. The prelate is correct. You should not take our word for it. Let us verify the sources together. The display shifted. The central column of figures remained, but now lines of light shot out from each entry connecting to a new set of windows. Each window showed the source document for the data point. A Kythian cargo manifest publicly filed. An Oakhaven energy grid report from before the Kythian lockdown. A time-stamped bill of lading from a neutral freighter captain sitting right there in the gallery. The mirror ledger was not a human creation. It was a reflection of the Kythians' own bookkeeping. A gasp went through the Oakhaven delegation. One of their leaders, a frail-looking man named Lyron, pointed a trembling finger at the screen. "That is the signature of my council," he whispered. His voice amplified by the chamber's acoustics. "On the transfer of the northern water processors." The display immediately highlighted the document showing the date and time of the signature. Then another window opened beside it. It displayed the atmospheric pressure and humidity readings for the northern continent for the preceding week, showing a sudden catastrophic drought. Beside that, a Kythian ship's log showing their relief vessel had been holding in orbit for 10 days before the drought began. They did not offer a cure. They merely sold water to a man dying of thirst. Prelate Orlan's composure finally fractured. A muscle twitched in his jaw. The timing is a coincidence. We were positioned to render aid as quickly as possible. It is a sign of our efficiency, not our malevolence. His voice had lost its melodious quality. It was now sharp defensive. The observers were no longer watching him with respect. They were watching him with suspicion. The freighter captains who lived and died by the honesty of their manifests were staring at him with open contempt. Rostova let the silence stretch a vacuum that Orlan felt compelled to fill. "The contracts are valid," he snapped, his voice rising. They were signed by the legitimate government of Oakhaven, without coercion or threat. They are legal under the Allied World's commerce accords. That is the only thing that matters here. It was the exact argument Rostova had anticipated, the argument he had been maneuvered into making. She stepped forward, her gaze sweeping across the chamber. "The prelate is correct. The signatures are real. The contracts on their surface are legal. So we are no longer here to discuss the what. We are here to discuss the how. How does a civilization, in the span of a few short months, sign away its own future? When the law becomes a weapon, justice becomes a shield." She turned her attention to the Oakhaven delegates. "Councilman Lyron," she said, her voice softening slightly. "Can you tell this inquiry what happens when a tithe is late?" The old man flinched as if struck. He looked at Orlan, who glared back a silent, powerful command. Lyron lowered his head, his shoulders slumping. Silence filled the room. The air grew thick with unspoken fear. It was the moment of truth. Rostova had brought them to the water, but she could not make them drink. The cage of gratitude was strong, its bars forged from fear and shame. Then a new voice spoke. It was quiet, but it carried the weight of a breaking heart. "They send the peacekeepers." All heads turned. It was not a council member. It was a young woman from the Oakhaven delegation, an aide who had been sitting in the back row. Her name was Alara, the same woman who had watched the water resequencer being taken from her district. Her eyes were fixed on the data screen on the manifest that listed her sister's name under a skilled labor tithe. "They come to our homes," she continued, her voice gaining strength. "They do not draw weapons. They simply stand in the doorway. They tell you that your contribution is vital for the continued stability of your world. They remind you of the pirate attacks, They remind you of the crop failures. They remind you that the gilded hand keeps the sky safe. She rose to her feet, her gaze locking with Prelate Orlan's. All the fear was gone from her face, replaced by a pure, cold anger. "They don't threaten you," she said, her voice ringing with clarity. "They threaten everything you love, and they call it a reminder of their friendship. The most secure prison is the one the prisoner believes he built himself." Orlan's face contorted into a mask of fury. This was not part of the script. A civilian and insignificant aide was undoing decades of carefully crafted legal doctrine. "This is an irrelevant emotional outburst," he thundered. "The feelings of a junior functionary have no bearing on interstellar law." Her leaders signed the agreements. Her people owe us their gratitude. And what is the nature of this gratitude? Rostova's voice sliced through his tirade. She gestured to the main screen where Magister, anticipating her command, had brought up a new file. It was a fragmented, heavily encrypted text, pulled from the deepest, darkest corners of the Kythian data network. The title of the document was stark on the administration of inferior civilizations, the Collar Doctrine. "Is their gratitude a gift?" Prelate Rostova asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "Or is it a collar, a permanent legal mechanism for ensuring a subordinate's compliance for their own good, of course?" Orlan stared at the screen, his avian features pale. The chamber was in an uproar. The observers were on their feet. He had not just been audited. He had been stripped bare. A tyrant's greatest fear is to be seen as he truly is. The inquiry ended without a formal verdict. It did not need one. The damage was done. The proceedings, broadcast on the public Allied Worlds channel, had become the most watched event in the sector. The Kythian hegemony's carefully cultivated image of benevolent stewardship was shattering. Rostova and her team returned to the accountability in a silence charged with grim satisfaction. They had won the battle of the inquiry. But the war for Oakhaven was not over. As they reached the bridge, a red alert flashed on the main screen. Commander Lee reported, his voice tense. "The Gilded Hand is deploying its fleet. They're not attacking. They're forming a blockade. Nothing gets in or out of Oakhaven without their approval." It was Orlan's response. A petulant, brutal act of a cornered animal. He could no longer claim to be a friend, so he was dropping the pretense. He was now openly a jailer. A new message arrived, addressed directly to Rostova. It was from the prelate. It contained no words, only a single updated tithe demand. He was claiming ownership of Oakhaven's entire orbital infrastructure, every satellite, every station, every sensor array. He was seizing the sky. "A cornered beast bites hardest. He's doubling down," Thorne said, his voice a whisper of disbelief. "He's daring us to intervene militarily. He knows we can't. It would violate our mandate." Rostova looked at the tactical display, at the golden icons of the Kythian ships forming a perfect impenetrable cage around the blue marble of Oakhaven. Her expression was calm, her mind racing. "He's still playing by his rules," she said. "He thinks the only tools are contracts and warships." She turned to her AI. "Magister, the mirror ledger is no longer just a display. It is now an active accounting system. Link it to the Allied World's commercial beacon and the sector's primary trade network." The AI's avatar glowed. "Commander, what is the objective?" Rostova's lips curved into a faint, cold smile. "Prelate Orlan is a businessman. It's time we sent him an invoice. You cannot defeat a merchant by sinking his ships. You must sink his credit." A new stream of data began to flow from the accountability. It was not a weapon discharge or an electronic warfare signal. It was a simple public broadcast of a bill. The mirror ledger began to issue debits against the Kythian hegemony's registered corporate identity for every moment the blockade was in effect. The cost of obstructed trade for the neutral freighters. The calculated economic damage to Oakhaven per hour. The estimated cost of humanitarian aid that would now be required. Each debit was logged on the public interstellar ledger visible to every financial institution, trading guild, and insurance syndicate in the quadrant. The Kythians' or gratitude tithe was being mirrored second by second with a reckoning tithe. On the bridge of the Gilded Hand, Prelate. Orlan watched the data stream with rising panic. His ship was not under attack, but he was bleeding. Every commercial alert on his console was a new wound. Trading partners were sending queries. Insurers were raising his premiums. His ship's credit rating, a source of immense pride and leverage, was plummeting. The humans were not fighting him. They were bankrupting him. He had built an empire on the perception of wealth and the flawless execution of contracts. The accountability was turning that empire into a public liability. A reputation is a castle of glass. He tried to retaliate. He ordered his ships to jam the human broadcast. But Magister was a far more sophisticated intelligence. The signal was rerouted through the neutral freighters, who were more than happy to act as relays for the power that was documenting their financial losses. He tried to issue a counter-proclamation declaring the human debits to be illegal. But the debits were all supported by the evidence from his own inquiry, now a matter of public record. He was trapped in a web of his own making, a perfect logical cage built from his own actions. Every move he made to tighten his grip on Oakhaven only increased the debt that was strangling him. The weight of a chain is felt most when you try to move. Days turned into a week. On Oakhaven, the blockade was beginning to bite. Food and medical supplies were dwindling. But something else was growing. The broadcast from the accountability was being played in every public square. The sight of the Kythian debt climbing, of their invincible protectors being brought low by simple arithmetic, was a powerful tonic. The fear was being replaced by a defiant anger. The Oakhaven government, led by a newly emboldened Councilman Lyron, and the aide Ilara, formally rescinded every contract they had signed with the hegemony, citing systemic coercion and predatory practices. They broadcast their declaration on all channels, a planet finding its voice again. The final blow came not from the human ship, but from the Kythian hegemony itself. A priority message coded to Orlan's eyes only arrived from the Kythian homeworld. It was brutally short. His actions had caused unprecedented financial and political damage. The gratitude tithe program was suspended sector-wide pending a full review. He was ordered to withdraw from the Oakhaven system immediately and return to face his own inquiry. His career was over. His philosophy was in ruins. He had been defeated not by a fleet, but by an accountant. The ledger always balances in the end. The Kythian ships, one by one, disengaged their blockade. Their golden hulls, which had once seemed so magnificent, now looked gaudy and cheap. The Gilded Hand was the last to leave its powerful engines, carrying it away in a silent, ignominious retreat. The void around Oakhaven was empty for the first time in months. The planet was free. On the bridge of the accountability, there were no cheers. There was only a quiet, profound sense of relief. Rostova watched the last golden icon fade from the tactical display. "Magister," she said. "Broadcast the final ledger to Oakhaven and to the Allied world's beacon. Mark the debt as paid in full by the relinquishment of all claims. The victory was not without its price. Oakhaven was free, but it was also impoverished, its infrastructure stripped its people scarred by the experience. They faced a long and difficult path to recovery. That was one cost. The other was less visible but no less real. The accountability had made a permanent enemy of one of the galaxy's great powers. The Kethian hegemony would never forgive this humiliation. Humanity had stepped onto a larger stage, and in doing so had painted a target on its back. The price of doing right was the certainty of future conflict. Thorne brought up the final confirmation on the main screen. The Allied Worlds Commerce Court had ratified the inquiry's findings. A new precedent had been set, a permanent addition to interstellar law. It was named the Rostova Doctrine, and it defined for the first time the principle of economic coercion as an act of aggression. It explicitly outlawed the use of gratitude contracts to create permanent servitude. All Kithian trade privileges in the sector were suspended. The entry on the public ledger blinked, the crisp, undeniable letters shining in the low light of the bridge. The mirror arrays that had powered the vast calculations of the mirror ledger, their task complete, began to cool, their operational glow dimming to a soft resting state. Rostova stood before the screen, her reflection faintly visible over the words that would change the galaxy. She thought of the quiet courage of Alara, of the chains broken not by cannons, but by the simple act of speaking a truth that had been buried under the weight of a false debt. Justice was not an act of vengeance. It was not about punishing the wicked or rewarding the righteous. It was simply the work of balancing an account, of ensuring that every cost was counted, every debt paid, and every truth, no matter how small, given its proper place on the ledger. It was a slow, difficult, and often thankless task, but it was the only work that mattered. The universe bends toward balance.